In this video series, we will construct a timeline of the Old Testament. The timeline will include major events such as when God chose the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Exodus from Egypt, the time of the judges, the time of the kings, the exile to Babylon, the capture of Babylon by Cyrus, king of Persia, and the birth and death of Jesus. The timeline places dates on these events which are accurate to the year. All the information to construct the timeline is derived solely from the Old Testament. Instead of telling you, why don't I show you? We'll unpack the timeline in more detail in this video series, but for now, here's a brief overview. All right, here's the timeline at its most granular level. So let's walk through the passage of time. Beginning with Adam and his main descendants, you can simply add up the years of each person using a calculator. Now we've done this for you. However, we also give you the Bible verses so you can verify the calculations yourself. I recommend you do some verification. It is my experience that the level of confidence you have is based on the amount of work you do. And don't worry, we will guide you through the process, every step of the way. So after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we get to the Exodus out of Egypt. Then a hop, skip, and a jump to the Promised Land. From there, you're into the time of the Judges, which then gets us to Saul, the first king of Israel. It is then 499 years to Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, and the destruction of the temple by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Then we're into the exile to Babylon, and after 70 years of captivity, Cyrus, king of Persia, captures Babylon, which occurs in 493 BC. Remember this date, 493 BC is when Cyrus overthrew Babylon. 5 years later, Cyrus allowed the Jews to rebuild their city of Jerusalem. From there, we get to the birth of Jesus and then to his crucifixion. And based on our timeline, the crucifixion is dated precisely 4,000 years from Adam. 4,000 years accurate to the year. All right, so why is this timeline important? Several reasons. Firstly, it authenticates the accuracy of the information in the Old Testament. Remember, the timeline is constructed solely from this information. The numerical data has been preserved in the Old Testament all this time. Now consider the Old Testament is a collection of 39 books, written by 30-something authors over hundreds of years. And you can testify to the granularity of the numerical information. You need to appreciate how that information has been preserved in a collection of books, different authors, hundreds of years. You know, this authenticates not only the accuracy of the information, but also the internal consistency of the Old Testament as a manuscript. All right, secondly, there are time-related prophecies in the Old Testament. For example, Daniel chapter 9 contains a prophecy, which I've explained in previous videos, that it will be 483 years from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem to the birth of Jesus. So this prophecy is time-stamped to Cyrus's decree, and we calculated this to be 488 BC, which places the birth of Jesus at 5 BC. Now remember that Cyrus first captured Babylon in 493 BC. It's important that you are confident that this date is accurate. And that's why I recommend you verify the calculations, or at least some of the calculations, enough to satisfy yourself the calculations are correct. Because Cyrus is a pivotal figure. In fact, it's his decree that closes off and seals up the Old Testament, and his decree timestamps the prophecy of Daniel. So it's important to accurately date Cyrus's overthrow of Babylon at 493 BC and be confident about this date. Right, so Google or Wikipedia dates this event at 539 BC, which is 46 years earlier. That would mean Cyrus's decree would not be in sync with Daniel's prophecy. It also raises other internal inconsistencies. The difference is because the 539 BC assumes the Persian rulers reigned successively, and that the reigns do not overlap, that there were no periods of co-regencies or pro-regencies, but we know there were periods of co-regencies in the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. So assuming the Persian rulers were all successive is really a gamble, a leap of faith. The calculations are simple enough. Add up the reigns of all the rulers. which is 207 years assuming successive reigns, and this is based on a list compiled by Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD. Then you calculate backwards from 333 BC, when Greece overthrew Persia. So 333 BC plus 206 more years equals 539 BC. It's the same process, but simply assuming the reigns were successive is a choice based on, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Whereas we, on the other hand, have constructed our timeline from first principles using granular information. And the information sets out the periods of co-regencies in the reigns of the kings of Judah and Israel. If you are satisfied with the calculations, then you can be 100% confident in our date of 493 BC. Finally, the combination of the timeline and time-related prophecies means we have really constructed a master plan. A master plan that is based on a 7-day blueprint of creation. I'll explain what this means in the upcoming videos. The master plan connects to the book of Revelation and will enable you to hold a position on what the Bible says about the end times. The master plan is 100% consistent with what the Apostle Paul wrote about the resurrection and transformation of the saints at the end of the age, which we define to be 6,000 years from Adam. Also, the Rapture Ready 2025 team believe the prophecy in Daniel chapter 12 about the resurrection and transformation of the saints will occur in 2025, which is right on our doorstep. So the timeline is our centerpiece showcase. If you understand it and are satisfied the calculations are correct, then you can use this timeline and our master plan to construct your own position. Remember, your level of confidence depends on the amount of work you do. All right, less talk, more action, so buckle up and let's get to work.